All right, so our next conversation now, we see the global trade landscape is undergoing significant turbulence as tariff wars, that's escalating, creating a ripple effect that extends far beyond the countries directly involved. For Nigeria, these tensions pose a critical challenge to supply chain, financing, the vital components of the nation's economic stability and growth. With supply chains already grappling with infrastructure gaps, currency volatility, and limited access to credits, the added pressure of tariff wars, that raises urgent questions about resilience and adaptability. Well, joining us to unpack this, we have Olusegun Sheton as a co-founder, Chief Growth Officer at Vendor Credit. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Ladi.
So, a lot to unpack now. Everybody's just trying to listen out for what President Donald Trump is going to say, or do next. But, with global trade tensions, escalating due to the ongoing tariff wars, many are concerned, about the ripple effects on Nigeria's supply chain financing. How are you, seeing these tariff wars impacting Nigeria's supply chain, financing? And do you think our economy can weather this storm?
Thank you for that question, Ladi. Well, supply chain financing basically, finances the real sector. So it's not immune to any of the challenges, whether it's geopolitical or macroeconomic challenges that happen. With the coming of Trump 2.0, right, he's insisted that what he's going to do is to put America first in everything they do. Part of him implementing that is what has brought up the conversation around tariffs. He intends to drive investments in the US. Rather than attract people, he's basically bringing out the big stick to flog them to come and invest in the US. And tariffs is the tools that he's using. Interestingly, right, he's fighting against the top three traders, the top three countries that trade with the US. So we're talking about China, Mexico, and Canada. Combined trade is over $1 trillion. That's between those three countries. And our people say that when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. Unfortunately, Nigeria happens to be one of the countries that are the grass in this particular case. A lot of his policies also, because they are protectionist in nature, have long-term impact on our economic and macroeconomic space. So you're talking about, for instance, the drill baby drill, which is basically upping US oil production from 13 million barrels a day, right, to higher numbers, and ultimately would see the US moving from, an importer of, crude oil to becoming a net exporter of crude oil. Now that has far-reaching impacts on countries like Nigeria that are oil producers. I think last year we did over $3.8 billion in trade with the US, right? And that was primarily oil-driven. So you can imagine what would happen if the US is taking away that from our fiscal budget plans. That's going to be serious for us. Also, there's the African Growth Opportunity Act that is maturing in September 2025 of this year. The initiative was supposed to enable African countries, right, to export to the US, in a seamless and easy fashion and cost-effective fashion as well. Under this regime, you cannot guarantee that by come September 2025, this is going to be renewed. There's also the outlook of the dollar becoming a stronger currency over the next, at least over the next 12 months. And that has big issues for countries like Nigeria that depend heavily on imports. So, there are a lot of challenges that it presents, right? I think even the World Trade Organization's DG, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, had said that, that the war between Nigeria, the US and China would translate to almost 6.4% loss in global GDP. You can imagine how whooping that would be. So I think, in summary, there are a lot of challenges ahead,
right?
And we need to look deep and inward on how we're going to address these challenges. That doesn't weigh us up.
All right, talking about looking, inward to address, these challenges. The challenges are undeniable, but there's always room, for proactive measures. At this time, break it down for me. What do you think can help minimize the impact, of these tariffs on a country like Nigeria?
Also, I'll give a response on three tiers of response. The first tier, obviously, is the government. The government needs to look at what the impact of all these policies would be on Nigeria, where it is that we're exposed, and create strategies, right, that would translate to policy and ensure that the policy implementation is seamless, right? To ensure that, we are protected against the shocks that these policies or these tariffs would bring down to Nigeria. The government needs to ensure we have an enabling environment. They need to ensure that they spur and stimulate local production in a way that at the end of the day would ensure that, we're able to produce not just for the consumption of Nigeria, but also export our excess capacity to earn FX for the country. They need to identify areas where we have comparative advantage, products where we have comparative advantage, and invest heavily in those things and drive them. And we need to look at our SMEs as well. I mean, statistics are clear regarding what SMEs are doing. With over 98% of businesses are SMEs, and they account for 8 out of 10 people being employed. And this is a sector that has primarily been left by itself. So the government needs to enact policies, not just on paper, right? But they need to find effective channels, such as supply chains, right? To route investments and credit in that direction to ensure that it has a far wide-reaching impact on businesses. On the corporate side, that's the private sector side, they need to change, they need to look inward as well. Those that have a lot of import dependencies need to start looking for local substitutes to replace those items. They also need to invest heavily in training technical talent locally, because with the dollars going up, bringing expatriate talent is going to be a huge weight on their P&Ls. So they need to start looking on how to enhance skill locally, invest in talent, so that they can upskill and be able to meet the requirements that they have. They also need to look at supply chains from a different perspective. A lot of them kind of look at it like they're doing the vendors a favor, but the reality is that the vendors who are predominantly SMEs are partners to these businesses, and the outcomes of whether they're able to deliver on the jobs they've given to them or not, where it has far-reaching impact on those businesses. They also need to look at some of the terms of the contracts that are restrictive towards supply chain financing or the assignment of proceeds. Those things have to be reviewed, right, in a bid to spur, financing in that space. And then lastly, the consumers. I remember when I was much younger and some Korean brands, auto brands came to Nigeria, and we used to look down on them, but some people eventually bought them. And today, those brands are now premium brands. And we're seeing that happening with the Chinese brands as well. So right. Our mantra as consumers has to be consuming made in Nigeria. Those are some of the things that we can do to resolve and mitigate against the impact of the tariffs of the U.S. against Nigeria's supply chain.
Exactly. I'm all for buy Nigeria at this point, and we don't need to import anyone to come do the work for us at this point. We need to save all the dollars we can. But looking ahead, it's important to envision a brighter future for Nigeria's supply chains. If we successfully implement these measures, what could the future of Nigeria's supply chain, what could that look like, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, the sky is the limit in terms of what it is that we can achieve if the supply chain financing infrastructure in Nigeria is properly oiled. So think about it like this. Supply chains it's globally, right? It's been around for over 4.5 decades. It's a $2 trillion economy on its own, right? So businesses, governments, and even consumers, right, can leverage on it as a competitive advantage, right? It's not a flash in the pan solution anymore. So if these things are implemented, then we can see our efficiency go up. I think the stats for our logistics performance index, which measures how efficient our supply chains are, we ranked 88 out of 141 countries. Our ease of business as well, I think the last statistics was that we're doing about 131 out of 190 countries or so. So if we're able to channel the investments and the capital that is required in supply chains, it will have far-reaching impacts that drive efficiency of businesses in Nigeria, generates a lot of employment for people that are in Nigeria as well, boosts our productivity as a nation, and then ultimately it creates a nation where there's collective wealth, right? That everyone is inclusive in sharing the commonwealth that Nigeria currently has.
Right.
So those are the things I see outlook for this. Yeah.
Right. I definitely, I can picture, what you're envisioning there, and it looks really, really good. But, thank you so much. We do hope for the best, in 2025 and beyond for the country. That was Olusoye Shetan, the co-founder, Chief Growth Officer at Vendor Credit. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thank you, Larry. Enjoy your day too.